that's down low.
Hi, I'm Doug Hoyt from Sounds Like Music Recording Studio, and you're watching Musicians on the Record. Hit it.
This is huge, musicians on the record. Bring it on.
Well, welcome to the show, Doug. I'm so excited to be in this beautiful studio. How did this all come about? Sounds Like Music Recording Studio.
Well, actually, I started Sounds Like Music Recording Studio back in the mid-90s. And when I started doing that, the digital world that we know of now that we use for recording really didn't exist, at least not for somebody that had a certain amount of finances to be dealing with. So what I ended up doing was using tape. I ended up getting 8-track reel-to-reel tapes.
Analog.
Analog,
yes.
Yeah, which I actually have over there in the corner still, kind of collecting dust. But if anybody wants an analog sound, we can do that here. But that's how I started. You know, pretty bare bones, just using tape. There was no, you know, you had to work with the tracks that you had, and I didn't realize it at the time. But that was kind of like, you know, what we know of now is old school recording, where you don't have the 62 tracks, you had the 8 and you had to make it work. So that's how I learned using that, and that's when I started the studio, was, you know, mid-90s.
Okay. If someone has never recorded before, what should they expect? What kind of tips or preparation should they know about of coming into a studio like this?
Okay. Well, recording in general is stressful. And one of the things that I've set out to do as a recording engineer and as somebody that owns a studio is to create an environment that's very comfortable. And I guess the word I'd be looking for, the words, is it's not sterile. It's not intimidating. So when you come to record here, it's relaxing. You try to set the performer's mind at ease, you know, right away. Get them comfortable with the space. Now, what should they bring before they arrive at the studio? They should have an understanding of what they want to achieve when the project is done. So I think, you know, somebody who's been doing it a while probably already knows this, but some of the younger performers, they might just think, okay, I could just show up and then this magic will happen and the end result will be exactly what I was hoping for. That's great, and sometimes that does work. Okay. But usually what we recommend is that before you spend your hard-earned money on recording time, that when you come here, you have an idea of what you want to do and an idea of what you're going to do. In other words, if you're going to be doing 3 songs, then it's very helpful to know those songs extremely well. Because once you start recording, the pressure automatically, you know, becomes evident. You know, whether you think that's going to escape you or not, I have yet to see that. Everybody, even the best musicians in the world, the best studio musicians, once that record light goes on, it's go time. And so having that preparation of what they want to play.
And I mean, because of so many things, let me put this down here, but because so many things have changed, meaning it's not like the 70s with like Sound City or where you go in and you go, I have no ideas, but let's make an album and let's write, and those days are pretty much gone. Or if somebody wants to do that with you, they can spend the money and do it.
Sure. And even back then it was about money. You know, the people that were doing that were high caliber, you know, recording acts.
That's right. That's right. Do most people come in with like an EP or wanting to record 3 to 5 songs? What are you seeing?
I see a trend of the 3 to 5 song EP for sure. Yeah, but you always get an artist that wants to sit for a while and maybe take actually, you know, 2 to 3 months and work on a project,
Okay.
which is always fun and great to be involved with.
Sure. Can you say, if you are able to, say a couple of names who you have recorded and who's
Well, I'll mention one of the most recent ones because I don't think she would mind. But the one of the most recent projects I worked on was the Laurie Jones Band album, and that was just a pleasure to work on. She knew what she wanted for a sound. She had the songs prepared before she came to the studio, so we call that initially when we're laying down the recording, we call that tracking, and the initial tracking sessions went very smoothly with that particular project, and then we could spend more time on developing the mix as we went.
So that's all part of your role as an engineer, not only recording it, but getting the sound right, the different tracks, the different levels.
Exactly, because what you're talking about here is something that's artistic. It's art, right? So everybody has an idea of what something should sound like, and everybody has an idea of what something good sounds like. And you might like the sound of a particular snare drum, say, and somebody else might come in, the artist that might be working with you, if you were drumming on it, they might say, well, I don't like that snare drum. Could you swap it out? And you might be thinking to yourself, what do you mean? The snare drum's great. So yeah, it does come into, I think working the compromises when you can, and finding that happy medium with the artists and the engineer.
Yeah, and the wonderful Laurie Jones, we had her on the show. Check her interview and episode out. She's a wonderful guitarist, singer. What's your role in that? Like you said, if something isn't sort of sounding right, or an artist has a vision of how do you sort of artfully kind of help them maybe see another way?
That's a really good question. Basically, when you get into a situation where you're trying to work on a sound, the best line of defense for that is to try to understand what that sound is at the very beginning, because then you're not pedaling backwards trying to find it. You place the microphones, you tune the instruments. Sometimes you come in and you think your guitar sounds great. Well, the intonation might be off. So, maybe the guitar needs to be worked on before you can actually, get a decent recording out of it. Maybe the drums haven't been tuned in 10 years or so, maybe they need new drum heads. Yes. So these are all things at the very beginning when you're starting to record that obviously I think most engineers try to accomplish, is to get the best sound possible at first. After that, it does become a bit of, like I said, the artistic flair of how you're going to make it sound. Do you want to make it sound like it's buried under water? Does it sound like it's in a room full of pillows? Does it sound like it's in a giant gymnasium somewhere? And these are all things that help shape the mix.
Okay, and certainly the sound of the room will have an effect on that. Definitely. Right? Yep. Yeah. And all of that amazing equipment you have right there, and we'll show some of it, that has an effect on it too, exactly. Correct? Yeah. So, clearly this is a passion. You've made this your life. You're making a living out of it, and it's not just like, yeah, I think I'll do music. Tell us a little bit about your music story. When did your passion for music start?
Well, I always say to people, and it sounds like a cliche, but most cliches are true. Yeah. I didn't choose this, it chose me. So I started listening to records at a very early age. Before I even started elementary school, I was buying records. And wearing out record players and, spending more time inside listening to music probably than I should have been, and this was the 70s. There was no internet, right. So I spent a good deal of time listening to music, and I still do. I still listen to music every day. I work around it, but I've never tired of it. That's in addition to recording. Probably my other passion and hobby is collecting hi-fi equipment and buying records, buying vinyl, listening that way.
Great hobby.
But it started. But I always say it started very young. The musician side didn't start until probably I got into my teen years, and in high school, and started playing in bands.
Okay. And so, who were you listening to as a kid? Because obviously, something about music and musicians caught you.
Well, I always say I feel very fortunate to have, be born when I was, because I was a kid in the 70s.
Yeah.
So that meant that the top 40 radio that I was exposed to had everything from disco to country to what we know as rock and roll. So I learned very early on to not pick any one style of music. I like most everything. Yeah, and the thing that I actually discovered years later was more into classical. I probably got my first experience from classical watching Bugs Bunny. Right? Honestly, it wasn't something, but more the top 40 stuff, everything from, the Joe Walsh, Rocky Mountain Way would have been one of my 45s that I got to theme songs from shows like SWAT or the Rockford Files, dating myself, but those were things that were part of my sound landscape, if you will.
That's great. That's great. And so, did you come from a musical family? Other people in the family love music as well?
I have a cousin that still plays drums. I used to, pretty much beg him to go over and play his drum set when I was little. He was playing in bands, so I thought that was pretty cool that he was playing in bands. He has a son that's a very fine drummer as well. It is in the family, but I'm the only one out of 4 siblings that became a musician.
Got it.
My older brother always had really good hi-fi gear, so I got exposed at an early age to, hey, that sounds a lot different than my little record player with a 3-inch speaker. Why does that sound so much better than mine?
So your engineering education started early as well as the music too. So.
I think so. In just picking out little things, listening to headphones and hearing stereo separation, listening to a Styx album or something and hearing things bank between the left and right speakers and saying to myself, well, how are they doing that? So inherently, whether I knew it or not, the groundwork was being laid for me to be an audio engineer at a very early age. I had things to record on as a kid. I had cassettes that you could record, but nothing, just, hey, what's this do? You talk into it and you hear yourself back, and say, hey, that's pretty fun.
The most basic.
The most basic of all of it. And when it comes right down to it, I guess that's a philosophy I've always kept with. I try not to overthink the recording process. I try to keep it as simple as possible and stay out of the way of the musician and let them do their thing. Yeah.
Awesome. So when did you playing music then come into the picture? You said around 16?
Yeah, I got the drum kit we were talking about earlier. I've got this beautiful 1968 Ludwig kit, and that I acquired that probably around 1984. And I was in a band pretty much that weekend that I got it. Honestly, I learned how to play drums sitting at the end of my bed listening to AC/DC's Back in Black. It was a very fundamental record. It's a powerhouse album. It's very straightforward backbeats, and I was realizing I was playing without having a drum kit, just making the motions with my hands. And then once I sat down behind it, then it was just getting your muscle memory going. So,
that's fantastic. Mostly self-taught, or
mostly self-taught. Some teachers, I did take lessons from actually a guitar teacher that actually taught me how to read drum notation, and that got to a point where, and I always am thankful for this because I was pretty young, and he came in one day when I was warming up, and he said, "This will be our last lesson," and I said, "Why?" He said, "Because we've got to a point where I can't teach you anymore." Wow. And see, and I'm not saying that because I was really good. It was just he was a guitar player, but he happened to play drums, and he did know the notation. Then I did take lessons from a guy named Al McIntyre that taught me my rudiments, taught me better syncopation, and actually got me on the road to learning how to play jazz. And I don't do a lot of it anymore, but back then, this is quite a while ago, and back then, I was studying it, so I needed to learn how to swing.
So studying in college?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. What was that experience like for you?
Well, any drummer that studied at college knows that one of the first things they do that you may resist is they teach you ear training. And they put you in front of a piano, and you have to learn that whether you like it or not. Right. So I am a very rudimentary at best piano player as a result of that, and it was a lot of fun. You got to play in jazz ensembles, and it was baptism by fire. A lot of really good experiences learning how to sight read, and had an experience where A teacher gave me an assignment. I showed up the next week. I had a whole week to do the assignment. I came in. I couldn't play it. The teacher said, well, I'm going to go get a cup of coffee. You go work on that. They went, got a cup of coffee, came back in 5 minutes. While he was gone, I thought to myself, I'll show him. And I looked at the music, and I started playing it. And then he said, okay, let's see what you got in that 5 minutes. And I played it note for note. And he threw me out. He said, you're wasting my time. You had a whole week to work on that. So for you young musicians out there, that was a moment for me that I've never forgotten.
One of your whiplash moments?
Yeah, and deservedly so. I had a week to work on it, and I just didn't put the time in that I should have. And
it happens, though, right? Yeah.
Learning curves, we call
That's
those.
right, exactly. Thank God we learned from them, though, right? Yeah.
We tried it.
Right, we tried it. That's right. Yeah. So you're doing all of this work. You're playing music. You're learning. It's not like you're just doing this haphazard. What was the dream that was starting to develop for you, Doug, as far as what you wanted to do with music, where you wanted it to go?
Well, I think like anybody who starts out wanting to do something, you have a goal. And it might be to some quite delusional. And I'm sure the Beatles had a goal, and I'm sure people around them thought that was delusional. Well, they became that. Now, I never experienced anything like that. I'm just using that as a metaphor. I probably, when I was 16 years old, had dreams of rock superstardom. Probably figured at this time I'd be on my third farewell tour, at least. That didn't happen. The goal line moves, or whatever. You adjust. I've had a great run playing in a lot of different bands over the years. A lot of great experiences playing with different people, and got into teaching audio engineering as a result of some of the avenues and roads that I took. Did that for many, many years, over a decade of that. And of course, with the recording studio here that I'm running, just always great opportunities to meet new musicians and help them develop and help them sound as good as maybe they hope they would sound. So I think at the end of the day, as everyone says, just dealing with music in general is pretty magical.
Absolutely.
So
when we adjust some of our dreams, because not everybody's going to be the Beatles, right? And understandable. One of the things we talk about on the show is, what are some of those successes and what drives somebody's passion for music, as well as what are some of those obstacles or challenges that somebody went through, some of those learning lessons that they had to adapt from. Any of those for you, the challenges with music, or?
Well, I think when you start out, you have visions of climbing this ladder, and that just doesn't always happen for everybody. And for me, I got into this comfortable space of playing out most every week, doing a combination of playing other people's music, but always writing songs and always throwing my own music in as well, and certainly doing a lot of shows with just my own music. And for me, that's always been the most gratifying, is when I play the gigs where I'm doing something that I've written, and not to take away from anybody that plays cover music, because I've certainly done that for years and years. But it was always more gratifying when somebody came up and shook my hand and liked something that I'd written, as opposed to I played a really good cover of one of their favorite songs. And again, not to take anything away from that, because that in itself is a special art form too, and that's entertainment. And when you do find yourself playing, say, out in bars, people just like to go out and have a good time, and most people like to hear songs that they know. And I learned that very quickly. If I wanted to stay working, I needed to learn how to play more of other people's songs. But anybody who's ever seen me live knows that I usually do versions of other people's songs, usually because it's pretty hard to mimic what they did in the studio.
Can't do it.
So I'll do a version. And so the best compliments from that have always been, I love your version of certain song better than the original. Oh, well, that's great. Thanks. That always made me feel real good.
What's the kind of music you like to play, whether cover or your own originals?
Well, the main style of music that I play is a basic, what I would call straight ahead rock and roll. It's not real heavy. It's not what I would call jam band music. And it's more along the lines of somebody like Tom Petty or Bruce Springsteen. Or The Who, things. U2 is another band that comes to mind that I think that I've always tried to not steal from, but borrow from, I guess is the better word. These influences. I've done original pieces of music where when we listen to the mix, I've worked with engineers who have been, say, fans of that same style of music, and all of a sudden it starts through the playback, and I'm like, oh well, the way that sounds like that U2 song that we heard, you know. Okay, well I put that in there because it. And the song that would be listening to that I did wouldn't sound anything like it, but you would hear elements of it. And I think that if people really listen to music, that there's always a map that goes backwards, and you just got to do your research and some history and peel back the layers.
That's right.
And everybody's been influenced by something.
Sure.
Even if you're listening to Led Zeppelin, clearly they were influenced.
That's right.
by, American blues.
Yeah.
Right.
You bet.
Just
Absolutely.
putting it under a new dressing.
That's right.
A new
That's
jacket.
right. Yeah.
What's it like for you as an engineer? And it sounds like you've been on both sides of the board. You record for people, but you've also recorded your own music. What's that process like when you're hearing that back? Because you've got some music released, and we'll put a link to that.
Yeah, that's an interesting question too, because I try not to record my own music. If I'm recording my own music, I'm making what we would call demos.
Okay.
And usually when I get ready to get serious about putting something out, I hire out.
Okay. You get a professional like you are, right?
Yeah. I have a producer that I've been working with for years. Her name is Stephanie Dufresne, and she works down in Nashville.
Wow.
And she's been working with me. She's almost exclusively now for over 10 years, and we work very well together in the studio. And she has no problem telling me when something doesn't sound right.
Okay.
And that's a whole other aspect too. There's a psychological aspect to it that a lot of people don't realize.
Sure.
An artist might come in thinking something's great,
Yeah.
and maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. And having the know-how to navigate around that and let them know that maybe we might want to go down a different. Because the first album we did together, she didn't do that as much, and the second one she was a lot harder on me.
Okay.
she became more comfortable with it. Yeah.
Tell us about your creative process with writing songs and albums, whether your own and or recording for others.
Everybody has a different approach to writing music. For me, I usually grab a guitar. It seems like anytime I try to write anything, because I'm such a rudimentary piano player, anything I try to write with piano ends up coming out a ballad. No matter what I do, I cannot write a hard driving rock song with piano. It's because of my own limitations. I choose to grab an acoustic guitar usually. I'll strum some chords, ideas of song structure or themes, what the songs, because I'm lyric based. I like stories. I'm a Dylan fan. I love Pete Townshend's lyrics. I love songwriting in general, and so having an idea is crucial. Although many a great song has been written just with a great melody and then the words come later. So I like to have an idea. Melodies and lyrics tend to start meshing with the chords that I start thumbing around with. And then I usually go back through and just clean it up. And on a good day, usually they can come out, pretty quickly.
Fantastic.
The recent one I'm working on, I think I knocked out within 20 minutes.
Wow.
But then the process of demoing it takes a lot longer.
Sure.
And maybe some fine tuning on some of the lyrics and stuff. But the basic idea usually comes pretty quick. If it doesn't happen fast, it tends to eventually get shelved and maybe pieces of it might get used on something else. That type of approach also can be helpful in the studio when you're working with an artist. They come in and they have an idea, and there's a lot of people that say, "Oh, I'm a producer," and again, not to knock anything away from that. I think everybody is. I think the people that come to the table with a song,
Sure.
they've somewhat produced themselves. What's hard is for them to hire somebody to help them step out of the way a little bit and say, "Well, maybe it doesn't need to do that part again. Maybe it's getting long."
Yeah.
And that's the other thing that's taken me over the years is to get out of the way of stuff. The first songs that I wrote, say 25 years ago, probably were pretty long or longer than they should have been, or started sounding like I was trying to fit a square and a circle together. I think the longer you do it, at least for me, I keep trying to get it so things flow good and helping artists see that in their sound. I think that's what a good producer should do, is kind of step back and hopefully see a vision for that maybe the artists themselves didn't actually hear.
You bet.
Or knowing that, hey, I'm going to step aside here because this is fantastic.
Right.
And it's hard.
Sure.
And then sometimes, sometimes I imagine a spark hits or magic happens in the studio, and
But it's like, and again, not to take anything away from anybody that teaches classes of songwriting and things, because you can have a formula, but when it's all said and done, there's been some beautiful pieces of pop music written over the years. There was simply no formula.
That's right.
That's
right. Exactly. Yeah.
has it ever happened where an artist comes in your studio and you're helping them, they can't get the music or the song right, and you guys sort of finish it together and you're on a songwriting credit?
And that could happen as simply as, with my drumming background, if they're playing something, I can kind of sit behind a drum kit. And as we all know, we like to, some people maybe don't like to give drummers all that much credit,
Right.
but drummers really can shape the way a song's going to go.
Right.
So you could double time something, half time something, throw a triplet in where it wasn't before. There's a lot that you can do to shape, and then that might make the songwriter go, oh, I never heard it that way. And then they might, ideas start bouncing.
You bet.
And I think, if somebody has that in their budget, because again, studio time, right? And we say that usually the upper echelon of the recording industry has the, finances and the time to sit for months at a time crafting a record, but not everybody has that. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, knowing what you want to do before you book
Coming
your
into
studio
it,
time. Yeah, you come in and that makes things go a lot smoother.
If people want to hear your music, Doug, where can they go and find that?
Probably iTunes. You can find the last album I did is on iTunes, just Doug Hoyt, and the name of the album is When Tomorrow Comes. And that's on iTunes. You can always go on, lately I've been using Reverb Nation, simply for the ease of it.
Yep.
And you can look up Doug Hoyt on Reverb Nation and you can listen to songs that way.
Awesome. How many albums have you put out there?
It's a good question. I want to say probably around a dozen
That's fantastic.
or so in different configurations,
Okay.
different bands
Yeah.
and things.
Excellent.
But I've only recently stepped away from a band name and become Doug Hoyt on the last album that I did.
Excellent. Great. So a new trend. So you're going solo, a solo
I
career.
saw a solo
Yes.
career, right?
Awesome.
Yeah, now's the time, right?
Hey, Sting did it. Why
Right,
not?
right, exactly.
So can we also talk about the education piece, because you've taught for a long time, and it turns out that we are connected to the same broadcasting school, New England School of Communications in Bangor, Maine, where I went to broadcasting school and you taught there
Yes.
for years. How did that even come about?
That just was honestly by chance, I guess, lack of a better word. I came around the school at the right time, and they needed help, and I ended up becoming a teacher at a time in my life where I never thought I would be a teacher.
Okay.
And it ended up being something that I ended up doing for 14 years.
It's amazing. So a happy accident. You weren't looking for it. It happened.
No, it was what we were talking earlier about, like, what do you want to do when you start out with ideas of, maybe being a musician or being in a band. Well, I can tell you without a doubt, the last thing that I would have thought I was going to be for a long period of time in my life was a teacher. Matter of fact, I had a drum instructor tell me once that he thought I'd be a good teacher, and I looked at him like I thought he was crazy. I'm thinking, well, no, I'm thinking that'd be the last thing I'd want to do. But it was very enjoyable. I enjoyed it. I loved the experience of meeting new students every year, every semester. Students would teach me things as well as me teaching them, and a lot of great people that I met over the years doing that, and a lot of them have gone on to be on really major album releases.
Yeah, such as
I've got a student that recently has been working a lot at Electric Lady Studios in New York, and is in the credits of the last U2 album, the last Springsteen album, the last Beck album, list goes on.
Sure.
For that particular
Pretty
student.
heavy stuff
Yeah,
there,
and there's a lot of other students that have gone on to work with other people.
That's fantastic. And so you were teaching recording engineering
Yes.
there. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And can we talk a little bit about that? We've sort of talked a little bit about, what a beginning musician might need to know and or what to know in the studio as far as to make music. If somebody wants to study recording engineering, because you've taught that for so long, what's something that they need to sort of prep for or look for?
That's a really good question too, because over the years doing it, I would get students that would come in, and about halfway through the semester, they either found themselves falling so much in love with it they couldn't get enough of it, or realizing that it was the last thing in the world they thought it was going to be, and they couldn't get away from it fast enough. So I saw both ends of that spectrum. Basically, when you are dealing with audio engineering, there's a lot of technical aspects to it. And if you do end up going to a school like NESCOM or one of the many other great recording schools across the country, they need to understand that there's a lot of work involved, and time management becomes key as well. The studying, doing all the work that's put. We'd always assign mixes and give the students a block time to go in and work on them, and make sure that when they were actually working on their mixes during that block time, that they were actually working and actually doing it, and playing around with the gear and figuring out what works. There's a lot of distractions when you're taking classes. Sorry, I didn't mean to scratch the mic. That's fine. So that becomes something that each individual needs to get into the routine of doing if they go to a recording school. And they're very helpful. I didn't have such a thing when I was younger. I had to learn simply by trial and error. Why is that piece of gear smoking over there? Oh, I did something wrong to it, but I don't know why.
Right.
And at that time, there was no internet to be able to look up and say, geez, how could I do this differently? You ask somebody who maybe had been doing it a while longer. Somebody who had some more experience.
Sure. So we talked about your first kit and the guitar and the music. What was the first kind of engineering recording board that you sort of worked on and recorded for somebody?
Honestly, that little Mackie sitting right there that still works like a champ.
Okay.
So it's one of those, they broke a lot of ground rules when they made that little mixer.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think that ended up winning a Grammy for a classical recording back when that was
amazing.
When that was released.
Awesome.
So that would be probably one of the oldest pieces as far as when I started the Sounds Like Music recording studio.
Okay.
Aspect of
Nice.
my journey.
Nice. Yeah.
But from that, I've simply gone on to be using a lot of other pieces of gear, like whether it was API at the school. At one point was the first school I believe in the country to have a DigiDesign icon, and that's also dating myself at that point because it's DigiDesign. It wasn't Avid, and now Pro Tools is Avid, and this was a proprietary board designed to be used for Pro Tools.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So can you say a little bit more about what the benefit, because anybody with a laptop these days and a DAW and a microphone feels like they can kind of record themselves. Say a little bit more, and they can, just logistically, but say a little bit more of the benefit of calling you and coming to work with you for recording and getting their sound right.
Well, you're right. Everybody has access their phone. Most people have a cell phone. You can record on your cell phone. When I started doing this, probably one of my first pieces of multi-track recording was a Fostex cassette 4-track machine, which I probably spent around $600 for 4 tracks. Nowadays, it's really easy to record. You can get really good recordings with some of the free, what we call DAWs, digital audio workstations, whether it be a GarageBand with a Mac. You can get great recordings using that. I used to teach a lot of students. I taught the Pro Tools software for years, and I would get a lot of students that actually owned Pro Tools before they took the class. And not once did I teach a student that already owned it. Not once did I do that where at one point or many points during the semester they went, oh, that's what that's for.
Right.
So it doesn't mean they weren't using Pro Tools. They were.
Yeah.
But when you take a class or you enlist the help of somebody that's been doing it a while longer, their experience comes to the table. So that means they've already made some of the mistakes that maybe you're still making, and maybe they figured it out. That's the hope, anyway.
Yes.
Somebody like me, honestly too, it's just years of listening and years of recording and listening and recording, and you can't, if you take care of your ears,
Yes.
you just keep getting hopefully better and better. You should have what we would call a head start on somebody that's only been around it, say, for 5 years
Exactly.
or something. And I think that inevitably does show. Everybody, it's like we were saying, they do have the opportunity, and it can be a lot less costly to record by yourself.
True.
But I think most anybody that does their research and goes to record at a reputable recording studio
Yes.
would be pretty happy with the end result, and probably scratch their head and go, "Oh,
Right.
well, that's how you do that."
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah. So the wisdom of that experience and that time, you can't fake that. You can't sort of do that on your own.
No, because it's like I've been doing this now, 30 years or so, and if not more, and I never stopped learning. I'm still learning stuff every day. I was working earlier before you all showed up, and I was scratching my head, going, "Oh, why don't I try that? That works," because everything's different. There's no one set way to do anything.
Yeah.
So
I usually ask folks, what are they still working on or learning musically? But I get to ask you both questions. What are you learning craft-wise in your playing? And what are you learning of all of this, recording stuff?
recording stuff that's an easy question. I'm still constantly learning with recording stuff. Every time a new piece comes out, or in my case these days, I'm trying to do a lot. I'm trying to dial things back and do a lot less convoluted engineering and try to get to the basics a little more. And I think, because I think it's part of human nature, the more options that we have, we tend to, it goes right back to those great sounding Beatles recordings. They didn't have a lot of options, but they made the most out of what they had. So that's kind of my approach with that. Musician-wise, I'm always trying to craft songs. I'm always trying to stay as fluid as I can be. I'm no virtuoso by any means on the guitar at all. Remember, I'm mostly a drummer that got tired of bands breaking up around me, so I picked a guitar. So I'm that guy. Drumming wise, lately, last month or so, I've got back to holding my stick's traditional grip, which I started doing and then got away with it to the matched grip. So I've been spending a lot of my time, just whether I'm watching a movie or listening to music and going along, getting my left hand to be able to move again. And it's been fun for me to again, I wouldn't do a session like that yet, because I left that style of playing for years. But
it's a little more practice.
And I like challenge. I like to be. It's not easy to, it's not hard to find a challenge for me. So.
Well, it's great though, because you're always learning, and I imagine, especially with the recording equipment too, the technology just keeps changing all the time, right?
Yeah, but as much as I like to stay up on everything, I try not to fall into that trap of chasing it. At the, when it's all said and done, when you hit play, do you have something that's going to move you in some way? Does it make you excited? Does it make you sad? Does it remind you of something? Does it make you want to play it again? I think that's the best thing right there. If you listen to a song and the first thing you want to do when it gets over is hear it again, then you're dialing it in right at that point.
Yeah, when that earworm gets in there.
When that earworm gets in there, yes. Exactly right. And I think that, most engineers, if they're doing their job right, they need to learn to get out of the way of the gear, and it's nice to have it, but when it's all said and done, do you have a product? Do you have a song?
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's all about the song.
Right, if that's what you're working on.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. And so, can we talk a little bit about the gear? You got some great gear here, and both musically instruments and the recording equipment. Can you tell us about your gear?
Yeah. Again, I try to keep things pretty basic. I've got a Digi 192 that doesn't get used a lot these days for your audio engineers. I keep things pretty simple. I use everything from Pro Tools to Presonus Studio One, which actually is a really nice DAW, very very user friendly. So if you're looking to get find a DAW or a recording platform that works for you, that you don't have to spend all kinds of times watching tutorials or reading manuals. I think if it's user friendly, then you're going to get to the meat and potatoes of what you want to do, and that's record music. I keep things pretty basic for my playback systems. I have an old Hafler amp that I use for my monitors. I have some small Genelecs there that I use, and some 40-year-old Snell acoustic speakers that when I want to listen to something that would have been on like a hi-fi system back in the late 70s, that's the sound. So I listen to a lot of my vinyl through that as well for my playback. For my monitoring. The gear and stuff, like I said, I've got an old 1968 Ludwig. It looks a lot like Ringo's, but it's an oyster blue. I believe he had an oyster black. And I've just acquired a 5x14 gold sparkle Ludwig Jazz Festival drum, which I'm really liking a lot these days. I've got a 6.5x14 super sensitive Ludwig snare drum. I've got some Peisty cymbals. I've got some old Zildjian cymbals that I use as well. For the guitars, I have an old Blues DeVille, which I bought new, but now is they actually make a retro version of that. So there's a make you feel old moment when something you bought new all of a sudden becomes vintage. I use a combination of Fender and Marshall amps here. I've got a Fender Rhodes stage piano that I have in the studio for anybody to use when they come here.
That's awesome. Yeah.
I also have a Gibson SG. I have a Fender Stratocaster that I use for certain things. I have a Fender Telecaster that I use. Fender P-Bass for the bass, and I have a trusty Takamine acoustic guitar that I've had now for about 16 years or so, 16, 17 years. That I use most every day.
Yeah, amazing. So this is like a full service studio. A musician could just show up and you got all the gear that they need.
All you got to do is bring the idea. Got the idea for the song, you don't even have to bring your guitar or anything unless you want to.
So if they want to, if they have their favorite, obviously, guitar, that's accommodated here as well, right? Yeah. Awesome. Great. Let me ask you, your ear is obviously very trained, both musically and on, all of the recording equipment. What's it like for you just listening to the radio or going to a movie? Are you like analyzing some of that stuff and kind of go, well, how did they record this thing, right?
Well, I've been blessed with the ability to enjoy music, enjoy movies, watch television shows, and really just be in awe of how advanced and how much better television shows sound compared to say 40 years ago, and the surround sound mixes that you hear from television shows, or even watching a football game in surround sound. I just think that's amazing. I do probably analyze it more than most. I might pick up on things that other people might not pick up on. But for the most part, I just enjoy it. I don't go down that road of being, stuck analyzing to the point where I can't enjoy it. I switch that part of my brain off and I just sit back and I just let it hit me. I love listening to music.
Yeah, so you can go with it, or it might inspire you of like...
Mostly it's an inspiration. I'll hear something. Before I do sessions, I'll talk to a client and say, well, what do you envision this to sound like? What do you have a certain sound? And then I'll research that sound. And then I'll try to dial that in as best I can. Or maybe they just want to borrow from it. Maybe they don't want it to mimic it because that's already been done. But I don't know how many times I'll listen to something and I'll think, wow, that snare drum is just one of the best sounding snare drums I've ever heard. How'd they do that? I was listening to Bruce Springsteen's The Rising the other day, and some of the best snare drums ever recorded, I believe, was on that album.
And was that Max Weinberg?
Yeah,
sure.
Yep,
right.
The engineer was Brendan O'Brien, I believe, on that particular recording, and I'm just in awe of some of the sounds that they got for that. And I'll sit there and focus on the snare drum.
Right.
I love the album as a whole, but the engineering side of me will grab something like that and go, well, geez, I don't know how they did that. Okay. Ultimately, it was a great drummer in a great sounding room.
Exactly.
So there you go.
Right. That's where it comes down to, right? As well as the sound guy. So, one of the other things we talk about on this show too, Doug, is around the business of music. and helping musicians sort of prepare for that, whether they want to be on stage or behind the board or whatever. Can you give us a glimpse in the business wise of music? Because things have changed a lot since what
Yes,
we're
they
talking
have.
about with the
Yeah,
70s.
sure they
Of
have.
what's kind of the process of, say I wanted to hire you to record an EP, how does that process even start?
Usually it comes down to a couple of things, and it's, do you want to book out hourly rates or do you want to book a project? Okay, so that project could go over the course of a week or could go over a course of a month.
Okay.
Hourly rates, again, you could just come in for a couple of hours and knock something out. And the other thing that I offer here at the studio is a day rate. You would just want to come in for a day. I don't recommend you going much more than 8 hours
Okay.
because you end up burning out.
Sure.
You know, at some
Kinda like
point,
with anything,
at some
right?
point, fatigue sets in,
Sure.
no matter who you are.
Right.
For all, and for me as well.
Sure.
You know,
You
so
bet.
yeah.
Okay. And for somebody who's wanting to, you know, studying like at NESCOM or another recording kind of place, and they have dreams of having their own studio or working for a studio, what advice would you give them?
Mostly the advice I would say is you want to be passionate enough about it that it's not work to you. That it's something that you're living, eating, breathing, and sleeping, as I used to say to the students. You need to be thinking about it a lot. It needs to kind of be part of you. That goes a long way, because I think that makes it so that you are so focused on it and you're enjoying to do it. People want to work with people who enjoy the work. They want to work with people who are positive. They want to work with people who not only know what they're doing, but are good with other people and are able to, you know, psychologically work with them and you tell them the hard truths sometimes without being offensive and things like that. The nitty gritty that I used to say, you know, to some of the students. But also ultimately just, you know, wanting to do it so much that you show up. You're there. You're not phoning anything in, as we used to say, you know, to people. You know.
Yeah, and you know that made me think about, you know, some of the power of networking and just being able to hang with people,
Right.
and because it's not all just about the buttons on the board or how well you can play the guitar or whatever. It's kind of just being a good person and hanging. Can you talk a little bit about that power of networking and how that has helped you, and or what you might advise somebody
Yeah, I
else?
mean, if you walk into a job or any studio, you know, on the first day, and you know, you assume that you're going to be in a certain role, maybe the role you want to be at in the future, but you say, this is the day I'm going to be there, you could overstep a bounds. And that's, some of that stuff was always hard to teach. It's some of this common sense stuff that you kind of have to sit back and see the big picture of, and knowing your place when you go to work with somebody. You know, and again, there's no real cut and dry answer here. Are you working with somebody that's going to be able to, you know, be relaxed when you're saying, okay, we got to stop here because the guitar's not in tune anymore.
Right.
Maybe the temperature changed. Maybe, you know,
Yeah.
something slowed something down.
Sure.
And understand that also it's a high stressful situation for a lot of people, and they might be more stressed than they normally would be. I'm talking about the artist,
Sure.
you know,
Sure.
so understanding that and seeing the big picture, I think, is something that's crucial when you're looking to get a job either at a studio or whether you're doing live work for somebody.
Yeah.
You know, some of the students that I've had in the past have gone on major tours, whether that's, you know, a major tour with Elton John or,
Wow.
you know, or whoever.
And
or
mixing their
Tool or
sound.
whatever. Yeah, right. Sure. Or just being what you'd call a roadie or whatever, or a tech.
Right.
But somebody that's obviously showing up,
Yeah.
somebody that's able to arrive and be there and work. And, you know, until it's all said and done at the end of the day, you know, and they're looking for more. And yeah, there's a lot of drive, and that's just not, obviously that's just not music. That's in any business.
Yeah, sure,
right?
sure. But you might not get the Elton John gig day one in the studio, right? You might have to help out, clean up or
People
something.
that are hired for those jobs, there's a pretty crucial or a vigorous, you know, what's the word, interview process that goes along. Places like Clare Brothers that hire engineering techs and what you would call a roadie. That's an old school term, I guess,
Right.
these days. But anyways, those people do only hire people that they sense are going to be able to be giving, their 100% all the time.
Right. Has that ever been a thought for you, or have you always said, I want my own studio?
Honestly, there's so many factors that come into, I think, the paths that we take. I have a family. You can't always be on the road, with that. You can't always. And the path I chose was to stay a little more local. And I dialed it back a little bit on that end. I like Maine. I like being here. South Portland and Portland in general is a great little city. It's not Boston. It's not New York. It's just right for me. I love it. There are a lot of job opportunities for, say, students that go off into audio engineering. Not only, say, around parts like this, but most of them have to go to either New York City or up to San Francisco or Los Angeles or someplace like that. So, not saying you can't do it, if you're a little more tied down, but they certainly, being able to just have to rely on yourself is definitely a bonus in that regard.
Well, and you get to be your own boss here.
Well, sure you do,
and
right?
That's a commitment to yourself, to your family, to be here, and it's working, which is really great. Right. 2 questions. One, and I've heard that you go in and you record the drums first, and I don't know if you do it this way or not, but I've always wondered why. But also, I remember Taylor Hawkins talking about all of his drums being muffled and taped and blue gaff or whatever. And just working at that or struggling with it's hard being in the studio. Mm-hmm. It's not easy. No. So can you say a little bit more, just because I'm a drum geek, of the drum parts, and does it work like that, or?
I learned early on the drums. The drum sound you get is usually the part of the song that kind of is a telltale of whether you actually went to a studio or whether you recorded it.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
In your living room. Now, that being said, because of technology, there are home recordings being done today that could have never have been done 20 years ago as a result. Not the least of which, anybody can go on the internet and look up drum tutorials on how to record drums, and they can sit there all day long and get very great ideas. I like a minimal approach. Being a fan of the classic rock stuff like The Who, I believe most all those albums, there were only 3 to 4 mics on the drums at any given time.
Wow. So a lot of ambient sound.
A lot of ambient sound. So I like that. I certainly am not opposed to closed miking as well. Usually the drums are recorded first, along with a bass guitar. That's something that I've done for years and years, and a lot of people do that. I can tell you on one of the last projects that I did record on, I was also hired to play drums on, and that was the Laurie Jones album. And if anybody listens to that album, I can tell you that the drums were all recorded after the main guitar parts and the scratch vocals. So drums were recorded after, but we used a click track.
I see.
So that goes into the other aspect of, can you play to a click track?
Right.
And that's not always easy, and that's taken me years to be able to not sound like I'm playing to a click track.
Right. Definitely can be a challenge.
It can be a challenge if you kind of, there's and it also kind of falls into this other thing of, how whatever you're working on, how precise does that piece of music need to be? Some pieces of music needs to be what they call dead on the grid.
Sure.
Just smack dab on the grid.
Yes.
You're setting up to a click track, you're staying right there. Other pieces of music can float around it a little bit and give it some energy and personality.
So you can be a little bit behind or ahead of the beat kind of thing.
Yeah.
But to record the drums first, you kind of need to have some kind of structure of what the song is going to be, right?
Yes.
Somebody has to have written that.
Yes.
Because I remember seeing an interview with Stuart Copeland of the Police, and him, he would go in and do his 1 or 2 takes, and then he was gone.
Yeah. A lot of times what most studios will do is they will record or do a scratch recording and have some other musicians play at the same time, so the song structure stays intact. And they might not use what they did, but they might use the drums, and then they'll go back and replace the bass guitar part, or replace the guitar part, or re-sing it.
Yeah.
What we call a scratch vocal, where you just lay down, where the singer might not be trying as hard as they might when they're actually going for broke.
Yes.
For the actual
Right, yeah,
take.
exactly. That's right. Great. That's helpful for me to know. Maybe I'm the only one who was curious about that question, because I, with drumming, follow the music a lot, not necessarily lead. And as
I
drummers,
think a good drummer should.
Right.
I think a good drummer should be listening. Is the not really a joke, but some will say the best seat in the house is the drum throne for a show.
Right, I agree. Right.
Like, wow, you're sitting back
That's right.
there and you've got these amps on both sides of you,
Right.
and you're getting to listen to hopefully some really great players, and
That's
you're
right.
playing along, and you're adding to it and flourishing and stuff. But that's, no, drums are great. That's one of the best parts about it. But it needs to interact. I think you're right. It needs to interact with the music. So.
Can you say a little bit also about the mindset of performing live versus when you record in the studio, whether yourself or you're recording other? Because, and I mean that in the sense of dealing with any kind of nerves or stress. Do you have any of that, or how do
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing this for years and years and years, and I still stress when I'm recording. I do. I own a studio.
Yeah.
When I'm doing my own project, and I've got the producer working with me, and that record light goes on, and I don't care who you are. Those microphones are picking up every little nuance. So if you hit a fret just wrong, say on your guitar, and the string buzzes, it picks that up.
Sure.
So you can either fix it or you can restart again. And if you're singing, you can choose to try to sing it from start to finish, or you can punch it in as you go. A lot of people might not know that happens, but I think today most people know that sometimes songs aren't sung from
That's right.
start
That's
to
right.
finish.
In
But I
peace.
always try to. I try to.
Well, that's
when
great.
I can.
That's great. Excellent. And then how about playing live? What's your mindset or any kind of prep with that?
Well, playing live for me is a lot less stressful, because if you make a mistake, you just keep moving.
Yeah. Right.
Most people don't hear it anyways. You might be the only one that picks it up. And I like the freeness of it, and the lack of pressure. Some people get what you'd call stage fright. I might do certain things where I might be a little jittery beforehand, but for the most part, no. Once the show starts, it's
You're going.
where you've done it enough.
Right.
Yeah. I can remember one of the first times I ever did play live in front of people, and I was quite nervous.
Sure.
Yeah.
What are some of those highlights for you so far? Because you got a long career to go, but career highlights with playing and/or recording so far.
Well, I love one track that I did a while back on one of my own songs. It's now closed down, but I got to record it at Alaire Studios in upstate New York.
Wow.
And that had one of the best sounding rooms I'd ever stood in. And the Nora Jones album, Come Away With Me, was recorded there.
Yes.
And David Bowie recorded, I believe, the Heathen album there. There's other, I'm not dropping names here, but just to give you the scope of the studio. The mixing console that we used and recorded through was used on the Brothers in Arms album, Dire Straits, and it goes on and on and on. If you listen, and I think Andy Summers danced across it on every little thing. She does this magic video, So we got to go through that board,
That's awesome.
and that was a great experience to record with. And honestly, I just love. There's no one thing that sticks out playing live. I just like playing. I usually like playing the gigs where it's all original music. Yeah, for me. Yeah.
So, with music playing and in your studio recording, where do you want music to go for you? Where do you want all of this to? What's any goals that are there?
My main goal, honestly, is to just keep having the opportunity to help people, get projects done that they want, and if their goal is to just, they like to sing some songs, and they want to play the songs for their friends or whatever, and that's what they want to do. Great. If they want to try to demo it off and become the next big thing, then I'm happy to help. What a privilege. For my own self, I just love still writing and recording and doing gigs when I can and getting out there and being a part of it. I've never tired of it.
It's definitely still a passion, it sounds like.
still
Yeah, it's really great. It's really great. for people who are watching this in the future, maybe generations of musicians who are up and coming, or someone who wants to have their own studio, what advice would you give them in order to get to a place that you are and to have a successful business around that?
Again, I'd say that if you want to get into the business of music in any way, whether that's performing, whether that's audio engineering, and again, as we keep saying, you have to have some element of a big passion for it. I think it comes down to, it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of hard work recording albums. You listen to a 3-minute song, 4 or 5 minute song, it's done. Well, that could have taken a lot longer than that to do it, and it would be a lot of, determination, and hopefully it went smoothly, but we're dealing with technology, so the understanding of the technology, and I think also understanding that playing music in general is work. It is a business. It's a lot of hard work, and some of it can be the pay can be something that might be fulfilling emotionally. You might also make a lot of money doing it, but you might not, and if it's fulfilling you emotionally, then great,
And hopefully both, right?
And hopefully both.
Wouldn't that be cool, right? Awesome. Doug, this has been a pleasure. I've been wanting to get into a studio for a long time. Doug Hoyt, thank you so much for being on Musicians on the Record. We are at Sounds Like Music Recording Studio in South Portland, Maine. Call this guy. Doug,
Thanks for
pleasure.
having me on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, I've been around and wanted you to know I've been taking chances, watching rivers flow. I've been walking by your house, had your lights down low. I've been making money, watching all my dimes. I've been waking early, making a difference this time. I'll be right there when you need me. Promise is a promise this time. And I won't be late for dances, 'cause my car won't start. Won't be late for nothing that leads me into your heart. I'll be sitting at your table. Promise is a promise this time. Why you never around when I'm ready to say what I just said? Something I'll figure out maybe later when you're out of my head. Well, I've been around and wanted you to know I've been taking chances, watching rivers flow.